rock.
Master drummer, how do you describe your music?
Um, my music, I describe it as happy music. And also I say it's African modern music, because what I do is I take traditional music and put some rhythms to it that that will make people in America happy. I'd say my music is a music that also can bring people together, can make people happy, and take discrimination away from human beings, and then we say we are all human beings.
Welcome to the program, everybody. This is a unique episode of On the Block Radio. It's a little different than what we are used to doing here. This is going to be more of a radio documentary style piece. Our focus this week is the legendary master Ghanaian drummer Obo Addy and the Obo Addy Legacy Project. Obo Addy is a master Ghanaian drummer, as I just said, who hailed from Ghana but spent over 30 years in the Portland area as a musician and as a teacher of children and of drummers in the area, and of bringing people together not only to have them experience Ghanaian music, but to bring together music and musics of various African descent and influence, to bring people of all faiths and backgrounds together in the common cause and the common experience of celebrating music and musical traditions. As a professor of religious studies, I say this on a regular basis. The Young quote that the first religions were danced and drummed, and we spoke about this with Stanley Krippner when he was on the show, and we will have Bob Walter from the Joseph Campbell Foundation on in the coming months. When we talk about early human history, we talk about the earliest impulse of our ancestors coming out of the Rift Valley in Africa. We're looking at people that celebrated their connectivity to one another and to the natural cycles of the living world through dance and through drumming, and through that embodied drum beat, that Shiva's heartbeat in the Hindu cycles. We get ourselves in touch with the pulse of the living earth. And so this is elemental stuff to our experience as humans, and our experience of the sacred, and our experience of the mystical. I became aware of Obo's music and of the Legacy Project, sadly, after Obo's passing already, as a member of the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness. I'm on their board, and it's a group of anthropologists that meet on a regular basis to have an academic conference to talk about things that have to do with shamanism and altered states of consciousness, and all of the things that affect the study of consciousness from an anthropological standpoint. And some of the organizers and folks that are some of the founders of that society are connected to the Obo Addy Legacy Project and to their music. And so at several of the past conferences that I've attended, they brought the Legacy Project to close the conference. And it's one of those things that when you see these musicians live, when you see the raw elemental power of these Ghanaian musicians, when you hear these polyrhythmic drum sounds, and when you see the dancers, you get ripped out of time and place and pulled into a consciousness that is initially completely strange to you, and then when you break through a certain barrier, becomes absolutely familiar in the cells of your body. And pulls you up into the rhythm in ways that I can't explain if you haven't seen it, and was so moved by the experience that I wanted to get to the bottom of who these people were. So we looked into it and found out that we have the Obo Addy Legacy Project in town, which was founded by Obo and his wife Susan, and who's continued Obo's mission of spreading awareness of Ghanaian music and Ghanaian culture through the world, and especially through schools. And so we got a hold of Susan, we got a hold of Michael Sweeney, we got a hold of Mike Crenshaw and Tasha Triplett and a few of these other folks who work with the Legacy Project, and who agreed to talk with us about Obo, about his history, about his time in Portland, about what it was like to be an African musician living in the middle of Whitelandia, about his passion to work with children and to work across lines with jazz musicians and hip-hop artists, and all of the other complex things that went into who Obo was as a man and as an artist, and what they hope his legacy will be and will continue to be in the lives of young people here in the region and beyond. So we were happy to have these folks on board. We love Obo's music. We love what he stands for. We appreciate their work to continue that tradition, and we hope you will check it out and consider supporting the Legacy Project as well. They need donations. You can buy the CDs, and you can maybe, if you're here in the region, bring them to an event at a school or something near you. All right, folks, enjoyed the episode. We sure enjoyed making it. We love you much, and we'll see you on the other side.
Welcome to On the Block with Andrew Gurovich, a podcast about authentic people doing beautiful things. Enjoy the show.
Obo Addy, the Ghanaian master drummer, bandleader, and teacher who made Portland his home for over 30 years, passed away in 2012, but his influence in Portland and the Pacific Northwest continues. Having spawned a love for African music in musicians and listeners alike, Obo's greatest contribution was his tireless work in the region's schools, where he provided exposure to African music and culture for generations of children. By the time he died, he had performed for over 1.5 million people in the United States and taught tens of thousands of children about the beauty and significance of Ghanaian culture and music. Susan Addy continues her husband's important work through the Obo Addy Legacy Project.
Obo and I met here in Portland, actually, and I used to coordinate the Artist in the Schools program. And at that time, I think it was around 1979, I had written a program in which artists from different cultures came into the schools to teach. It was a multicultural arts program, and Obo had just moved from Seattle to Portland. So I heard about a drummer from Ghana who lived here now, and I offered him a job in the program that I was working with. And that's how we met.
And the rest is history, right?
The rest was history, yes.
Susan explains how Obo's love affair with the drum began early in life as a member of a huge Ghanaian family with a traditional medicine man at the head.
Well, what I've learned about Obo from what he's told me, and also from relatives of his back in Ghana, is that he was a very precocious child, gave his mother a lot of trouble as a young man, but was interested in playing music from a very young age. And he was born into a family of drummers and dancers. So his father was what people here might call a medicine man, but in Ghana they call it a wancha, which actually means father of the spirits. So this family was huge. And his father married 10 women, not all at once, so it wasn't like, a huge number of people all sitting around together at the same time. But over time, there were 10 wives, and he had 55 brothers and sisters.
Why didn't you take up being a medicine man? Since your father is a medicine man, a Wanchi priest, you took up music, Oba. That seems very unusual. You didn't follow in the same tradition of your father.
Well, because my father celebrated his ritual ceremonies with drumming, dancing, and singing. And we have about 55 brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. And all the men are very good drummers. True that. We didn't go to school to learn. You can't learn all this drumming and things, especially our traditional music and culture. You can't learn it. You won't be able to learn it in university or school. You have to be born in a house where it happens. So it seems like I took the right part, but I didn't learn the medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I think about Obo's funny stories, and he loved to tell stories, anyone who knew Obo knew that. I think I mentioned before that he was known for being, I don't know if he was a brat exactly as a child, but he was very stubborn and knew what he wanted. So he told us this story about when he was a boy. So I don't know how old he was. And he didn't like what they were having for dinner. So he didn't want to eat it, and he got really angry. And he climbed onto the roof of the house and told his mother, he was crying, and he told his mother that he was going to jump because he was so upset that he couldn't get what he wanted. So his mother looked at him standing up there on the roof and said, "Go ahead. I have 3 more children, and if you're gone, that's okay, because I have other children who don't give me such a hard time." So he tells us that he thought about it a lot, and it didn't work. He didn't get what he wanted, which was the dinner that he wanted. So he came down off the roof. But I think his mother was very wise. It was the right answer.
Before moving to Portland, Oregon in the 1970s, Oboe had already achieved a good deal of success in Ghana and internationally by being asked to represent Ghana in the 1972 Munich Olympics.
Oboe was known as a crooner. So when he was in Ghana, it was really during the years of Ghana being a real cosmopolitan place, especially the city of Accra. He was part of a band called Ghana Broadcasting Band, and he was a singer and played the bongos. They did a radio show every week, and he was on the radio show, and everyone knew him from that. So he was very successful in Ghana on his own. Then in 1972, he was basically recruited with his brothers to represent Ghana at the Olympics in Munich. So he and his brothers, and I think there was maybe 1 or 2 others with them, but there was a total of 6 of them representing the country of Ghana, and they performed at the Olympics. And while they were there, they met an agent from England who wanted them to stay and said that he would represent them. Oboe started to come to the United States in the mid-'70s, but didn't actually stay here. So he and his brothers had been living in London, and they were brought to the U.S. by Washington State Arts Commission. And so they would come to Seattle and work with the University of Washington and travel around the state teaching and performing from like 1973 through 1975 or so, or 76. And then he actually moved here the following year.
Portland had a vibrant music scene in the 1970s that provided fertile ground for Oboe's polyrhythmic sound. This led to many successful collaborations across musical genres with local, regional, and national artists.
Well, music in Portland was great in the late 70s. You know, it was a time of amazing creativity. There were a lot of public programs. There was I think it was called CETA program that paid musicians to perform. So especially in the jazz scene, there was all kinds of avant-garde music being played all over. And so when Oboe first came here, he played with Thara Memory's Creative Jazz Orchestra. And later, Rich Holly had a group, a jazz group. I forget what they were called, though. And they played this really crazy music. And Oboe, couldn't understand it even because it was just so out there, but he loved it. It was something different. So he was doing, jazz, orchestral music, and he created his own band then that played his compositions. And it wasn't until later that he really started playing traditional music.
Oboe's complex Ghanaian rhythms garnered him both local and national attention almost immediately, and this led to a series of collaborations that lasted for several decades afterwards.
Well, he formed his band in 1981 here in Portland and began touring in about 82 or 83. And then over the next, so many years, he began to tour nationally and started to make a name for himself. I think especially when he began putting out his own recordings. And then he wrote a composition for the Kronos Quartet that was recorded on Pieces of Africa. And that really seemed to put his name out there in a more serious way than just, I shouldn't say just, but that's how people would say it, just as a drummer. But once they saw that he was a composer, I think people began to take him more seriously. He met Randy Weston in New York and was on one of Randy's CDs. He invited him to play on Volcano Blues. And then also he met Andrew Cyril, who's a jazz drummer, and Andrew asked Oboe to join a group that he has called Pieces of Time, and they toured through Europe for a couple years. And that was actually later. That was in, I think, the late 90s, maybe, or early 2000 and something.
Oboe's reception was not entirely positive in the Pacific Northwest. The region has a long history of racial insensitivity, and a proud African man celebrating Ghanaian culture was something that many people in the region didn't know how to handle. But Susan explains how Oboe used music to transcend those divisions and connect with people on a deeper level.
Oboe was not as aware of racism as you might think. I should back up by saying in Ghana, it was a very different place. And because so many Europeans came to Ghana, there was a lot of, I guess I would say, mixing of races. So, there were these bands back in the, 60s maybe, the Black and White Spots, for example, who were, European and African musicians playing together. He told me he never really felt that much racism until he came to this country. But he just tended to just plow through it. And didn't let it affect him that much. He was aware of it, but he didn't seem to be that upset by it.
Oboe Addy worked with over 1 million children in the Northwest teaching African drumming and culture, and this was probably the most important part of his legacy. And after he died in 2012, Susan was able to continue this legacy with the help of several volunteers in the Portland Public Schools and through local musicians to teach children about the connections between their own identities, their own communities, and the history that Oboe brought.
So ready? Guys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ready, go.
Been working with the Chief Joseph School for about over a month. Doing a workshop, and they've been working so hard for last month or so, and this is the result for what they're doing today.
I like doing it because I never really get to drum, and it's really fun.
This is more about culture, you know, bringing the culture from back home, from Ghana, and sharing with the kids.
Well, it's a great cultural experience to learn about West Africa and their traditional drumming. And then we also wrapped in some art with it, and we learned about the symbols that the Ghanaian people use.
There's these symbols. Each symbol represents something. One's leadership, and there are all these other ones like love and safety and security. And there's all these other ones. And you had to draw the one that you like the most. We learned about patterns.
We did 1, 2, 3, better, better, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
The eyes lit up when they play these drums. It's wonderful to them. And I think, you know, from being with them for this long, I can see how enjoyable it is for them, you know. And a lot of them also said to me that it was so much fun. They had so much fun.
The kids just really enjoyed it. It was such a wonderful and rich activity for our class.
And I learned a lot also from them as well. They learn from me.
My name is Tasha Triplett, and I am the education coordinator for the Obuadi Legacy Project. It's been great how it varies, but also how great it, like how immersed the impact is. So, for instance, working in high schools we've worked in has been Cleveland High School mostly, and as well as Lincoln a bit, but mostly Cleveland High School. And at Cleveland, I mean, there are students who are really into hip hop who didn't know as far as the connections that it had to African music. There were some students who really into rock music and didn't understand the connections that it had to African rhythms and African music. And then there were students who, you know, come from very different backgrounds and people of color, which is a lot of what we talk about in the development of hip hop and the impact it had on communities. And they're able to see a connection, particularly to issues that are happening today. So it's been a wide impact just in the high schools, and then at the Oregon youth facilities, particularly, it's been a lot of the thing we get most hearing from these youth is that, you know, they never learned this in school. So why didn't they learn this in school? And this is so important to their identity or a way that they can understand the world different than they thought they could before or understand before.
I mean, to me, hip hop is an African form of musical and cultural expression created in the diaspora. So though it was created by blacks in America and with Caribbean roots as well, it's still we're expressing the African culture in us through hip hop.
That's MC and hip hop artist Mike Crenshaw. Crenshaw has worked with many innovative and culturally relevant artists throughout his career, including Dead Prez. He acknowledges the centrality of African music in the reclamation of black identity after the diaspora caused by European conquest and slavery.
And so I think there's kind of a it's like a current contemporary expression of things that are ancient in us. And there's a natural bridge between what we're creating in the so-called New World and the forms of cultural expression that come from Africa.
I first became aware of oboe's music when I was undergrad at Portland State University, and I had met Michael Sweeney, actually, who was a teacher at Lincoln High School at the time, teaching the African American Studies class. And I went to volunteer with his class for a practicum program for history that I was a part of. And so he was teaching about oboe, and oboe came in and played his music. So that's when I was first exposed to oboe.
Oh, so you saw him live?
Yes, I saw him live. Yes.
And what was the impact that had on you?
That was the first time I'd ever experienced a live African drumming class. I had taken West African dance before, but it wasn't country specific or culture specific. And so to be able to see oboe there live, playing the music, working with students, the excitement of it, it was really cool. And yeah, I started getting involved with the project shortly after that.
My name is Michael Sweeney, and I guess you'd say I'm a retired Portland Public School teacher, retired a few years ago. My involvement with Oboe Addy precedes the Legacy Project. Of course, that started after his death a few years ago. But I would say when I first met a guy named Jan DeWeese, who, as far as I'm concerned, he's the preeminent Portland ethnomusicologist in terms of learning and teaching musics from all over the world, especially as they are embodied in people who come as refugees or migrants to the Portland scene. Jan DeWeese has a peculiarly tuned ear to hear those musics that come with those people. So when Oboe Addy came to town through Jan's grapevine, he had heard of this amazing musician. And Jan was, I think, one of the first Western musicians to greet Oboe Addy. I got to know Jan DeWeese when he was doing work on Hmong and other Southeast Asian refugees. We became very good friends, and then he told me about and introduced me to the depth and the complexity of Oboe Addy's musics.
Crenshaw talks about his first encounter with oboe's music.
Susan and Oboe Addy reached out to me and, God, must have been about 5 years ago, 2010, 2011. They contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in working on developing a project with them. And Oboe wanted to do something that was like a show that encompassed live music and performance, a production that built the bridge visually and sonically between traditional Ghanaian dance and percussion and his music and contemporary hip-hop. And he knew that I was part of the hip-hop community here. And so him and Susan reached out to me, and then we came together and built this show called Diatribe. And so that was, we've been working together closely since then. And I think it was putting Diatribe together, putting that production together, which we did twice in Portland, that got me involved with working in the classrooms with drum language as well.
I came to start working with the project during the Diatribe show that they were showing, that they were performing at Alberta Rose Theater. And Oboe immediately, after doing this live experience on stage, between looking at the connections between Ghanaian drumming with Ghanaian hip hop and African American hip hop, he wanted to figure out a way to do that type of work in the classroom, in schools. And so with the drumming residency that he already had going on for years, he wanted to build more culture and connections with African Americans into that. And so that's how I stepped in to help with the project.
I went in to record a verse for a song, and it was kind of a back and forth. There was a situation where Oboe was sending tracks recorded here in Falcon Studios back home to Ghana, and there was some issues with him not being satisfied with the sound. And that was early on in our relationship, and I actually wasn't satisfied with my verse, so I redid my verse at least once. And the song just came out on a recent CD, and it's called Wayako. And so that was kind of one of the first things we did in addition to putting the show together over the course of a few years. And then eventually I was going into classrooms and doing my spoken word and a little bit of teaching along with Alex drumming.
This is S. Renee Mitchell, creative revolutionist, and you are listening to On the Block Radio.
Listen, engage, transform with On the Block.
No greed or exclusion, no need for illusions to sow seeds of confusion. Violence is useless and of no interest to me. My voice is conducive to setting us free from destruction. We need more discussion, harmony, percussion, rhythm and production. I've been fighting all my life and I'd much rather speak. I want no more strife, it's time to know peace. This universal language is global and rich. We need not to be famous, we learn and we teach. All classes and races, cultures and ages. What's real is what's basic, it's not complicated. Food and shelter, clean water and health. In a world of suffering and struggling, there is also help. It begins in our homes with love of ourselves. In a world of abundance, we're spreading the wealth.
no. The hour fiashi waka keshi na wa fedo. Wasumo no wasumo be feya te yeshon. Holy mami ejone wenye mi na kaino. Jeya tele jana ne ni kebezo. The hour fiashi waka ya keshi wa fedo. Wasumo no wasumo be feya te yeshon. Ishose, yeah. Mineke mite ya tata lebi kiashi no. Chifese mini ina no mwe iya chuno. Ke watashi wa ye elenye na ke bayobu. Sunday ni na bwake yo. Na fende mo ne katuto. Hey, damo shi wa fe wono. Waka dule tu te akbla bi besa ne ko dabi.
The depth and complexity of Obo's music reveal the need for one to become familiar with what Michael Sweeney calls drum language, that learned ability to intuit meaning and cultural significance as manifested through the music of the drum. In fact, all of the people we spoke with mentioned this profound fascination with Obo's music as a lens into deeper aspects of what it means to be human, what it means to manifest transformation through the creative heartbeat of the drum. In particular, what it means to African American young people who have been cut off from their roots and traditions, and thus to a vital part of themselves.
It's really hard for me to really understand what I'm listening to, that there's such a complexity here that I need a guide like Jandy Weiss to take me through it. But as I pulled back a little bit from my own simple-minded sense, it immediately became apparent that drum language was something that someone outside the culture might have to gain an initial foothold in to be able to appreciate the rest of the complexity that is Obo Addy's art.
Once again, Mike Crenshaw.
Yeah, it's powerful, good, soulful music. You know, it's like, it reminds me of Fela or James Brown or, you know, Hugh Masekela, all the greats that can do music that has that's African in its sound and origin, but that has like a kind of universal global appeal that anybody could listen to and enjoy. Yeah.
We have a program called the Drum Language, and drum stands for Dialogue of United Rhythms and Movements. And essentially that program is like a drumming workshop plus. And so there's physical activity as far as the students are learning how to drum the different rhythms of the African drum that Obo uses, as well as parts of the culture that he comes from, the Ga culture and the dancing. But they also get to learn as far as the impact that African music had on America and the progression all the way from early American music forms up into the development of hip hop in the United States. And then the impact hip hop has had all around the world and going back to Africa and seeing what it's doing there as a positive social change.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an oral tradition and there's a rhythmic tradition in rap music, which is such a significant part of hip hop culture. It's what the world recognizes most, I guess. When the world thinks of hip hop culture, they think of rap music. A lot of times, even before they think of dancing and DJing and other aspects of hip hop culture. But in that oral tradition, you have the MC, and people compare the MC to the grill. And in the rhythmic tradition of the beat, you have the rhythmic traditions of Africa.
Through his music and teaching, Obo affected hundreds of thousands of lives in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. His legacy continues to be written through the project's commitment to share his music and culture with young people around the country.
I think it's a light bulb moment for a lot of people. The feeling I get is that people might intuitively understand already the connection, but it's helpful for the teaching to be a tool to really kind of draw it out. And build on things that we either take for granted, you know, or overlook, that I think need to be highlighted.
We take these programs to high schools, middle schools, we've worked in elementary schools, and we also work in Oregon Youth Authority facilities. And we've worked in 2 facilities now, and this year we'll be working in 3 facilities.
I mean, the Obo Addy Legacy Project, Obo, his family, Susan, Alex, the dancers, the musicians in the different groups. I just think, I don't know what, tens of thousands of people, really. I mean, did you, Susan, do you know, have you kept track of how many kids you guys have worked with roughly over the years? Close to 1 million. So, you know, that's people, a lot of people who grew up in the city were students in classrooms that, you know, or went to school where Obo came and did his thing. And the extent to which that has a lasting effect on somebody's consciousness, it's hard to say because it's different for everybody. But I often run into people who know who Obo is and speak highly of him, think highly of him, appreciate his music, and have a memory to share about places they've watched Obo perform. When I was in Zimbabwe for the first time at the Zimbabwe College of Music to play at Shoko International Music Fest, I was talking to a professor there, and that was when Obo was sick and he hadn't passed away yet. And I mentioned that, and he was concerned. And so it was nice for me to witness that people on the continent, outside of Ghana, even recognize Obo as a great musician as well.
The Obo Addy Legacy Project continues the valuable work of adding to the quality of life, the diversity and the creativity of the Northwest and beyond, bringing meaningful programs to communities, schools, and prisons, and encouraging cultural connections which provide a broader, more inclusive view of the world.
I see the future of the program really expanding. I think continuing to work in schools, it would be nice to be able to work in colleges as well. I know there are a lot of hip-hop classes that are going on in Portland and other places, but to be able to connect with that and show the African root to that. And I think also working and empowering youth who are coming out of the Oregon youth facilities to get involved in this deep culture and maybe finding an outlet as they come back to their communities to do African drumming or dance or learning hip-hop dancing or emceeing or engineering in order to be able to make their own music and positive cultural impact.
You know, we're continuing to do work through the drum language program in classrooms, and I know that there's, you know, I check out the Facebook feeds and the messages that Susan sends out periodically about, I see pictures of events. There's so much happening consistently. There's what I interact with, but there's always work being done that I'm not necessarily part of. So just constantly being in front of thousands of people, months and months, and the young people, you know. And I think that one of the things I've learned is that young people have to somehow have a way to get involved. They need to be invited into the project and learn how they can eventually be part of it if they want to, because that's what's going to keep the thing growing and moving, is creating opportunities for younger people who will grow into it and then continue to teach other young people that come behind them.
Well, in the future, I mean, I would like to continue with what we're doing and see if there are ways that we can really deepen the program, do more training of the artists, which really benefits them. And we started a program last year that we'd like to continue, where we're taking the same idea into facilities for incarcerated youth. So we're doing programs, and like this year we're at McLaren, actually coming up really soon. We were at Hillcrest last year and the North Coast facility. And then later in the year we'll be at, I believe it's called Oak Creek, which is a facility for young women. and then possibly we'll move to a facility in Tillamook. So these are, all programs that have importance to me and to our board of directors. And the artists really, really have been enjoying it. I mean, for them, I think they were surprised at the profound effect that they were having and at the response of some of the young men and, who told us how much it meant to them. We were at North Coast last year, which is in Warrenton, and we were there for the whole spring break. And, some of these young men were saying, how grateful they were that we would take like that much time and come out there and spend it with them. So I think that's to me, our future direction is really all about education and breaking down barriers and creating a better place to live for all of us.
Allow me to take you to the street where the drummer and the thunder meets the road. Palms and fingers tap towering tones and countless ears collect a connection resounding from home. O.B., a master musician. Movement is medicine, a magic emotion physician and purveyor of culture in tradition. Addy's heart, akin to Lewis and Clark, was also on an expedition. An agreement to marry soul and rhythm and in matrimony engaged the mission. Northwest America from Northwest Africa. Accra and brought the God to Oregon. And in the region of his birth, the former Gold Coast would foretell his worth. Destiny divine as he resided near the center line of the earth. It's called the prime meridian. Longitude defined at 0 degrees. Let's call it the oboe degree. The great circle dividing the sphere, representative of the dichotomy that he lived right here. That high life, that fast, that high life is too fast. No, you can't play at that pace in a jazz number. 3/2 clave motif is a beat we can't get underneath, man. He's either too African or not African enough for America, and he's too Americanized for Africa. Criticism abound all over town, but the only true concern was sound. The community racked their brain to figure what be the best box to place his name. Master drummer redirected his aim. Compositions with Kronos, jazz with Joe Kelly, hip-hop in a diatribe with fire in the belly. At war with world beat, the genre and its metaphor. He survived in hope that every throat would recite the note he'd sing. 1936, January 15. Derived from a place that translates as warrior king. And as Dr. Martin stated, oboe demonstrated a dream to let rhythm ring. The families he brought who sought a better living, he sowed those seeds. Souls passed in the spirit of those loved always renew. He stayed strong. Ask Okrapong and Kukurudu. Symbolic his backyard grew with hulu, blueberries, and bamboo. His drum was superfood, nourishing and nutritious as he fed colleges and public schools. Hamo'o means to howl at hunger, and we know these children need to eat. Music and art as a means to depart from defeat and escape poverty and oppression by using our hands and feet. Do I feel we have supported his cause? No. Dare I ask if there wasn't and hasn't been enough reverence and regard for something so simple yet neglected so hard? I couldn't have loved a man so quick, in so short a time, under the demand, understanding that this man's story is now mine. We celebrate his decoration, and he flies free in the after to experience emancipation. History now frozen, but our collective heat can melt the ice, sharing the soul and rhythm of the drum that patterned this planetary body into a purposeful life. I love you, Obo.
This concludes our look at the life, work, and legacy of the legendary Ghanaian drummer Obo Addy. For more on the ongoing work of the Obo Addy Legacy Project, please check our website. Now we'd like to bring you the rest of our extended conversation with Michael Sweeney. Our discussion centered on his work with the Obo Addy Legacy Project, but soon ventured into so much more. We hope you enjoy it. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to that. What I'm reminded of is Stanley Krippner famously introduced Mickey Hart and the Grateful Dead to African drumming and to, I'm going to butcher this, but I think the 60-cycle drum hum and how it intonates, or how it, resonates. I'm glad we're taking this question out later, with people in particular ways that tunes their consciousness to particular frequencies of being open to to teaching and resonating with their surroundings.
I'm going to jump a little bit here and say that one of the other profound realizations for me, and I know for a lot of my students, is not just the individuation of drum, but exactly the opposite, the polyrhythmic embrace. That what oboe would teach was a certain basic drum language, 5 hand positions, 5 sounds. But when he brought the drum to the students, there'd be a dozen students in there, and within a few days of teaching, we would begin to experience the possibility of polyrhythm. And I think that's the more profound thing, that yes, an individual is called, it's transcendent, it's ecstatic, it's some call outside myself, but the drum itself is about a performance where the drummer is one of many drummers.
The kind of quantum resonance there. Yeah.
So what you hear when you hear the polyrhythm is something that most Westerners have never heard or never participated in formally themselves. And that polyrhythmic possibility exponentially increases that cyclic hum you were talking about before. I mean, by the time you get to polyrhythm, it's all over. You're done. That's it. And if you become really, really good at polyrhythm, that's when the you goes from singular to plural. And I don't think I've ever seen anything that's more performance ecstasy, immediate performance ecstasy than teaching young people polyrhythm. It's almost as if when you're doing the polyrhythm, they stop and they go, "What was that?" That was you, all of you together. You're not playing the individual guitar or bass line. You're part of a larger thing.
What was your impression of the man himself?
Boy, that's a hard question. I think I've met a few people who qualify as geniuses, and Obo Addy, the man himself, certainly fit that category. It's as if he carried with him a certain kind of, this is a bad phrase, but a kind of multicultural weight. He existed betwixt and between so many cultures with whom he was trying to make a kind of harmony possible, that it was a weight he bore. And so he was rarely, in my experience, real light and comedic. More often than not, he was quite heavy and demanding. He reminded me, when he worked with my students, of a person who was a classical music teacher. He was very good with the students, and he commanded and demanded respect. And he wanted to get these kids to get up to speed as quickly as was humanly possible. So over the years, like from the early 80s until 30 years, you saw him repeat over and over and over again, but with the same sincerity, lessons about African drumming and respect for Ghanaian culture that never changed in their sincerity. So he was a very complex, heavy dude.
I asked Susan this, and I wanted to ask you as well. You and I are long-term Portlanders, and Oregon is not what you might call an integrated or racially diverse or welcoming state, and doesn't have a very nice history in terms of diversity. And so, what was it like for a black man like him, who was so proudly African, to come to the Northwest, where people would be, freaked out and intimidated by that? But then Susan said that he encountered that racism but didn't understand it, and because of the music just kind of floated over the top of it and never let himself get snared by it. Is that your impression?
So how did Obo Addy react to Whitelandia? Since you and I are natives, where'd you go to high school?
I didn't actually. I moved here in 1991, right after high school. I was in California.
Okay, so I was born, grew up here, graduated from Benson High School in 1966. So do the math. But my impression of being a Portlander who has, let's call it a more anthropological sensibility, is that Portland has had a kind of modestly hidden diversity, but more recently it's become immodest. It's gotten worse. So Portland in the 70s was writing a kind of 60s openness that a lot of other cultures were. And while statistically speaking there were not a lot of people who were minorities, there was still a lot of ferment and diversity in the community. Let me see if I can put it like this. Portland has been the poorest community on the West Coast until recently. And as the poorest community in the West Coast, we had a very flat class structure. Having a flat class structure actually opens the movement between people of different classes, therefore different races and ethnicities and socioeconomic groups. So it was quite possible for someone like Obo to be known and to talk to by way of first, second, or third iteration, everyone in Portland. The schools in those days were fully functional. They suck now by comparison. And by fully functional, we would say in our conversation here, they had a well-funded and well-articulated sense of students being introduced to the musics produced by a variety of communities. So if you ask anyone who went to school in Portland in the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s, almost every single one of them heard Obo Addy.
It's like outdoor school.
Thank you. Yes, very much so. My children heard him and I saw him. And so there was a desire to have a common vocabulary about diversity that was encoded in the schools, made possible by the flat class structure. It's all changed.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, was he a part of that great Williams Avenue music scene, or was he considered separate from that?
I don't know.
Okay, because it relates to the question of, do you think if he came to Portland today that he would be successful?
As I open Willamette Week and I look at all of the musics that are available, they don't seem very diverse to me. And I don't want to belittle anybody's musical expression, but it doesn't seem like the Portland musics of today are as global as they were in the past. And the people that I know that play authentic, culturally different music, often end up being most appreciated in a expanded garage on St. Patrick's Day.
Let me ask you about that, because one of the things you did this year that was really remarkable was bringing the oboe dancer and incorporating that into the Irish music. And that, to me, seems like a very oboe thing to do. I'll just tell you this story. It's not going to, I doubt very much that this will end up in the episode, but this will launch the question. I held a Passover Seder once when I was back in my incarnation as a Christian pastor. I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this.
Wow.
Yeah. And
do an episode on that.
yeah, so the first level of appropriation, right? Although I am Jewish, but nonetheless. And then I thought, yeah, this will be cool. You know, I had a friend who played the bagpipes, and I was listening to him practice while I was preparing the Seder, and I said, you should come play bagpipes at our Seder, because what's more Jewish than that? And so then I had the bag, but we were in this small space like this, and bagpipes are very, very loud in small spaces, and he was nervous, and so he was playing horribly, and on for like 10 minutes with this thing, and so it was an absolute, my attempt at this kind of integration of multiple styles and cultures failed miserably, and I never did it again, right? But one of the things I appreciate about oboe is this mix of jazz influences into the music, of what the project's doing now, hip-hop. So can you speak a little bit to that, about his ability to not only bring Ghanaian music to the forefront, but then integrate it with uniquely American styles like jazz and hip-hop?
So oboe's capacity to integrate a variety of world music styles probably comes from being socialized in one of the most complexly musical places in the world. And we're not talking Africa. Africa's not a country. We're talking West Africa, and specifically the borders of Ghana. I hate those borders. But in any case, he was brought up within and fluent in, I don't know how many musical traditions. Just for the sake of brevity, I'm going to say at least a dozen. So he grows up conversant in a dozen different cultures' musical languages. So to be a musician in a place like Ghana is to be fluent in kind of jazz fusion crossover, and analogously speaking. But what better setup for jazz fusion crossover than to be a musician in Ghana? And also, as we've talked about before, all people in the world have their own sense of agency, integrity, and what is meaningful. Thank you very much. So they're not passive listeners. And so what happened to musical evolution in Ghana within those dozens of traditions, as the musics of America and Africa diasporically crossed and recrossed and played and replayed, Ghana was one of those places where those world musics started, returned to, got refined, and went around the world's block many, many times. So oboe was very sensitive, always very sensitive, to a wide range of musics. It wasn't just Hugh Masekela who introduced us to the music. It wasn't just Ola Tunji, drums of passion, himself not even a drummer. It was a whole second level of musicians like oboe who had this integrity and who came out and came to Western musicians with an integrity that blew those Western musicians away if they were willing to listen. Oboe stuck around long enough so the listening became more global, or at least more a part of the exchange between Africa and African America, all of the Western Hemisphere. Oboe would be one of the leading practicing proponents of that. He had two bands, as you know, Kukrudu and Okrapong. One was supposed to work with the evolution of tradition, but the other was, for all practical purposes, one of those global jazz bands, which Westerners have only recently, I think, come to appreciate. And so in both of those incarnations, oboe was moving towards what he saw as an evolving definition of Africanness, of blackness, of Ghanaianness. And the most recent expression of that is hip-hop.
I want to ask you in a second about that and about the work in the schools, but can you maybe speak to the significance of him being a conduit to reconnect those two traditions, because Crenshaw spoke to this a little bit about the diaspora and this wedge between someone who did not experience American blackness and that socio-cultural slow motion Holocaust, and so to then come and integrate oneself into a community and be meaningfully black in the same way as people who have come from that tradition. There's a lot to navigate there, and you and have spoken to how he was able to do that and how meaningful that was to him, but how meaningful it was to these African American young people to see a legacy of Africa that isn't just one of devastation.
Well, that's a very deep question, how Obo, as a Ghanaian and an African, related to, interacted with, improvised with American blackness. As a white man, I can only give, my point of view on this.
Sure.
But first of all, as we all know, the American black community is terrifically complicated. So any stereotype that anyone operates,
one position, sure.
Yeah, has to be gotten rid of. One of the most, to cut to the chase, one of the most interesting expressions of diversity is in rap hip hop culture. And I'm an old guy and I know a little bit about it. I'm more anthropologically interested than an avid listener, but we know that hip hop in its inception in the Bronx came out as a multi-level kind of phenomenon, but it had roots. Some of those roots led directly to Jamaica. Well, okay, and the roots of Jamaica direct. I mean, there was a vocabulary, like a subconscious, a sub-vocabulary that's there to be heard if you're willing to listen to it.
Like the griot and the Malian tradition.
Exactly, griot, Malian tradition. Or if you listen to the Malian musicians today, boy, they sound an awful lot like Deep Delta Blues.
Yeah, Karkar.
Or does Deep Delta Blues sound, or is it, we almost need a new vocabulary. We do need a new vocabulary to talk about how these musics have been improvising together. They're brilliant musicians and they're hearing each other. So when we put the Irish and the Africans together in the garage, they hear each other, especially on a percussive level. Maybe they hear each other on the level of a, lack of a better word, oppression. That cultures, when pushed, never remain silent. They don't just say, fuck you. They celebrate. And so part of the quickest way for a lot of people outside the culture to hear the celebration of I am still here is the music. And then if you get two cultures who have experienced a relative level of similar oppression, and they put those two together, okay, so hip-hop and Africa, same, but rarely on the same stage, together in the same way. What we now know, and Crenshaw has been proving in his acts, is that hip-hop is a global phenomenon. Obo recognized that years ago and said to Crenshaw, I believe, what you're doing, bless your heart, is not new. It's old. What you're doing is not African-American. It's African and African-American. And Crenshaw, from what I understand, immediately responded to that, as did a man named Alan Wan, W-O-N-E, and other musicians who, given the opportunity, put together a show called Diatribe. Did they speak about this? Okay. Diatribe was Obo and Susan's vision of a performance of about an hour and a half that would bring an audience to see on stage the different musics, the traditional Ghanaian and drumming and traditional Ghanaian dancing, then see some of the traditional hip-hop with spinning the platters and b-boying and crumping and rap improvisation. Then the vision was to have them improvise together. And so they choreographed a couple of pieces that are just brilliant. And just unfortunately, that show has not been reproduced except one time. But when you see the improvisational brilliance of the two musics working together at this show, Diatribe, Oboe's vision, aided and embedded thoroughly by Susan, became clear. There was a clarity there. I have a copy of it, by the way, which you should see.
I would love to. What was his vision? Just a couple more questions for working with children. And how did that start? And what did he do in the schools? And then I want to ask you about the project and the Legacy Project and what it's doing.
I think that I'm just going to interpret a little bit here, but Obo Addy's vision of working with children again grew out of the kind of childhood he experienced in Ghana. Anthropologically speaking, we know that many other cultures have a much larger and integrative view of what the family is. Kinship structures are more complex. A lot of people in other cultures grow up with a transparency, not isolated in an individual house, but in a kind of a series of a compound, so to speak, where all of your brothers and sisters by several wives and cousins are present. And so I think it was second nature, and again part of Obo Addy's vocabulary, to always work with children, to do music and to be who he was. It was inconceivable not to work with children. And for a while, Portland responded.
What kind of effect did you see it have on children?
Well, of course, kids respond in ways. It depends, too, of what grade level you're dealing with. So the earliest levels, they just get great smiles on their face, and they want to participate. If you've gone to any of the shows at the grade schools, you can see the kids are usually just, really excited. And it is, you almost want to say that something is being given to them that is dormant, is latent. And so Western culture tends to separate out and compartmentalize a lot of things, and school is rarely associated with ecstatic performance. Yeah. So when they see these dancers and drummers and musicians and singers participate in ecstatic performance and then maybe have a follow-up of learning drumming and dancing themselves, then it begins to settle in on a deeper level. The last few years that I had contact with him was when I was teaching anthropology in particular, and for several years in a row I had him come in. I got some funding. That's a whole nother terrible issue. But I got some funding, enough funding to bring him in for several workshops with students, classes of students, 30 drumming. And then that would result usually in about a dozen kids who say, we want to continue, and sometimes dancers as well. So over the course of my last 10 years at Lincoln High School, he came in dozens and dozens of times. I know when I run into some of those students later, they'll say, Mr. Sweeney, Obo Addy. Yeah. I said, well, I was in college and I was taking a music class, and I mentioned I took drum lessons from Obo Addy. And the teacher looked at me and said, from who? Obo Addy? Right or not, fortunate or unfortunate, a lot of the kids, a lot of Portlanders don't realize the treasure we have in our indigenous musicians.
When you say Portland responded for a while, what changed?
Schools, since I am a public school teacher, and I'm a person who has multiple faiths, like any anthropologist, but I believe in the possibility of public education. There's nowhere else in American culture where different segments of American population meet the way they do in a public school. If a public school is well funded, if there's lots of programs and lots of community connection and outreach, then it comes to resemble the community itself. And for a number of decades, Portland Public Schools was that. Quickest statistic I can give you. Up until, let's say, about 2000, there were a third more adults in the public schools than there are today. A third more adults. That meant teachers, counselors, coaches, kids could play sports for free. If there were enough kids to have 3 freshman soccer teams, so be it. So we funded and we paid for, and we valued all those things. When we began to change our political economy, the value of public education took a different, more conservatively politicized turn.
This is in the early 90s.
This begins in the 90s and then continues today. It's too complex, really, to go into further here, except to say that that sensitivity towards cultural diversity that had a lot of place and a lot of presence in Portland Public Schools is diminished. If you want another radio show on that, let me know. Get you a panel of people who would really love to talk.
I would love to.
Yeah.
Where do you see the project, the Legacy Project, going in terms of its work now? What is it doing in this theater of less funding and less access?
You've talked with Mike Crenshaw.
Yes.
You've talked with Susan Addy and Tasha Triplett, who are the prime movers in a lot of what the Obo Addy Legacy Project is doing. I've been directly involved with a teacher at Cleveland High School named Lynn Allers, with whom you might want to speak, and with the principal of Sunnyside Environmental School, Amy Kleiner. Those two public school contexts are a place that I hope the Obo Addy Legacy Project will take seed and will continue to grow over the next several years. Now, it can grow in many directions. I think it's important to talk about specificity. Ghana is a terrifically complicated place, and Africa is even huger and more complicated. So one potential is for the Obo Addy Legacy Project to move out of and embrace a larger African context. Now that can happen through Mike Crenshaw, who's part of the African Hip Hop Caravan and routinely goes to South Africa, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Senegal, I think. And so there may be a mix and a flow and a connection, a synergy between what Crenshaw is doing, going to and returning from Africa, and the Obo Addy Legacy Project, hitching some of its creative wagon to Crenshaw. Another piece is how we are perceiving what rap and hip-hop music is evolving into. It is a vocabulary of great power for disenfranchised but expressive people all over the world. One of the most tragic contexts of our disenfranchisement in this culture are the number of incarcerated youth and adults we have. The project has received really interesting responses from the prisons and from the quote-unquote justice system, and so that could also be another avenue. And then we also have to see how we might evolve in terms of those really creative teachers that are out there that we haven't met yet. You know, continue to do outreach. Yeah.
Great, Michael Sweeney. Thank you so much for talking with us. Final question: if you could sum up, and maybe you can't, but if you could sum up Obo Addy's legacy in one word, what would it be?
One word. I don't know, ecstasy. But of course, you know, In a social sense.
Yeah.
In a social sense. Not me and I'm tripping for myself,
Yeah.
but an ecstasy that leads me into the polyrhythm of interacting with other cultures.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, man.
Sure.
You've been listening to On the Block with Andrew Gurovich. The show is produced in Portland, Oregon by Michael DiNapoli at MD Productions. Theme music by Cat Power. Closing music by Jonathan Oak. Look us up on the web at ontheblockradio.com, where you can also link to us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't forget to tune in next week for a brand new episode. Previous episodes can be found on our website. Thanks for listening.
Oh, you beautiful kitties. Oh, look at you out there. Creators of art, of history, of thought.